Hello, and welcome back to my podcast. As you can probably tell from the title, today I'm going to be talking about human pheromones and how they relate to us as people and our sexuality. But first, I have a couple quick updates, and I know that people hate long ass intros, so I promise to make it quick. The last time I was recording, my cat was playing in the background, and I got a few responses from this. Some people really want to see my cat, so if you're listening on YouTube, I will put a picture on here. And other people thought that the jingle bell sound was a collar and thought that that was really cruel, but I can assure you that he does not wear a collar, and he was just playing with a jingle bell toy. And also, I am creating a website now for the podcast. I did some research into this because I didn't really think it was something that I wanted to do because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I've never visited someone's website, but you know, it's a great place to have kind of a central hub for everywhere that I broadcast, and also in future if I wanted to design some merch, I can sell it there. And also it's great for having a blog. So I've decided to make a website, and that is coming soon. And I'm not the most tech savvy person, so it's not really been an amazing time for me so far. Oh yes, and if you're not listening to me on YouTube, then I will be posting a picture of my cat, Snow, on my social medias, and I will pop a link to those posts directly in the description of this podcast. Okay, so now that all of that is out of the way, let's get to the topic at hand today, the pheromones. Several weeks ago, I was reading an article that was written, I can't remember actually who the original article was by, and I didn't save it, so I apologize for not giving credit. But basically, there was a study done by scientists in some European country, I believe it was Sweden, but I could be wrong, and they were making like a dating sort of, you know, like speed dating, but pheromones only. So the requirement was that people had to show up not wearing any fragrances, not like freshly cleaned. They had to show up sweaty and then swab themselves to get their pheromones onto, you know, some kind of cotton. And then this was a heterosexual based study, and so the men smelled the women's pheromones and the women smelled the men's pheromones, and I thought this was extremely interesting. I was extremely intrigued by this, and when I'm intrigued by any article, I write it down in my little notebook for further study later, and I have now done that further study, and I am so interested because personally, I prefer my partner not be wearing tons of like cologne or soaps or fragrances because I prefer natural fragrance, and a lot of people think that that's extremely disgusting, but I don't. I find it very attractive. So this is right up my alley. I will look for the original article about the speed dating pheromone thing, and if I can find it, I will put a link to that in the description, as well as links to all of the other articles that I referenced during this podcast in case you want to have a read for yourself. And just to warn you now, I'm only 4 minutes in, but I can already tell that this is going to be a long one. And you have the advantage of being able to see how long this is. I don't know how long this is going to be, but I know it's going to be pretty long because this is so interesting to me and there's a lot of information to get through. So the first article that I found interesting and helpful was from betterhelp.com, and again, that will be linked down below if you want to read it for yourself. I'll only be going over a few of the key points from this article, not the entire thing. And this article was specifically written regarding heterosexual people, but the information that I'm going to be talking about from this article is actually relating to everybody. So here we go. Pheromone attraction. Scientists in osmology have determined that both sexes are attracted to each other through chemical messengers. These chemical pheromones stimulate sexual arousal, desire, hormone levels, and even fertility when released. Pheromones are detected through smell and are produced through sweat, saliva, and urine. When I read this, I was really surprised that even fertility levels are increased or decreased depending on the pheromones. I think that is insane, but also really interesting. And now back to the article. What's the connection between sexual attraction and pheromones? Androsterone is a pheromone that makes men sexually appeal to women. Only 10% of the male population secretes an abundant amount of the pheromone, and these men are considered the sexiest or most desirable in the population. Some of these men may not even be physically attractive. However, the pheromone androsterone changes the way people perceive their desirability. That again, it's so interesting. Only 10% of the population is secreting this pheromone. Androsterone is produced by the adrenal gland, testes, and ovaries and is released through a man's skin, hair, and urine. Women also produce and release the pheromone, but at a rate 4 times less than men. This pheromone is also produced by the sex glands and secreted through sebaceous glands in both male and female sex organs as schmegma and has masculinizing effects on men. Oh, I feel like 15 years old because schmegma still makes me laugh. Okay, now regarding women's pheromones, women also produce sex pheromones called copulin in addition to androsterone. Men do not produce copulin, however, and the pheromone seems to correlate to a woman's menstrual cycle when measuring amounts of the pheromone. The levels of pheromones a person is producing are going to influence their sexual activity heavily. People who produce an elevated level of pheromones tend to have sex more often, feel more confident and sexually attractive, and can bond with others. High pheromones also make people more sexually attractive to others and therefore encourage more attention and social engagement. Pheromones can also have the opposite effect and make you sexually repellent to some. I mean, and they go on to say that basically, the love or lust at first sight kind of phenomenon are usually pheromone related. I would go one step further and say that if you've ever done internet dating and you met someone and you kind of had a connection, you didn't know if it was going to work out, but then you felt a real chemistry when you met in person, that's likely pheromone related, in addition to the fact that you are already mentally and emotionally attracted to that person. Now, all hope is not lost for people who aren't producing high levels of pheromones, specifically men, because this next part touches on that. Increasing your pheromones for attraction. Because pheromones can increase your attractiveness and lead to a better sex life, fragrance and cosmetic companies have been working to bottle the scent of pheromones like androsterone into perfumes. Studies using pheromones at the University of Chicago showed that men who used topical pheromones had a 52% improvement in starting conversations and even a better rate of improvement in staying engaged in conversation. They also saw improvement in getting compliments, noticeable flirting from the opposite sex, and a 40% increase in female sexual responsiveness. In the same study, females who used topical pheromones found themselves asked on dates more often and an increase in foreplay during sexual activity. 74% of the females who participated in the study saw a huge increase in their interactions with men overall, with most reporting having sex more often and receiving more intimacy, such as hugs and cuddling after a sexual act. Another study in 2002 by San Francisco State University showed that women who wore synthetic pheromones were found more attractive by their partners. This is very incredible to me, that scent is playing such a strong role, but it's so subconscious, you don't even realize that it's happening. And most people are thinking that they want to cover up their natural scent, heavily perfumed people specifically. And, basically all of us are using some kind of scented shampoo or soap, and we're covering up our natural scent. But it's literally so important for, dating and attraction and maintaining attraction if you're in a long-term relationship. And this article does go on to mention that although researchers speak of being able to smell pheromones, these chemicals don't have an odor that we can consciously detect with our noses. Specific areas of our nasal tissues process pheromones and send messages to the brain about the scent, even though we don't smell it. Pheromones are present in sweat, but the chemicals are not what makes sweat have an odor, which, that's kind of common sense. But the thing is, with this whole thing, in the other articles and studies that I've read, and I will get onto those soon, researchers in Sweden, I believe, but I will again link the articles, have actually done studies on this using MRIs and other imaging equipment to actually see the response human brains have to pheromones. So even though it's literally an odorless substance that our bodies secrete, it is having a huge impact in our brains, and it's influencing our decisions, our actions, whether our inhibitions are up or down, etc. Then the article does say that if you exercise more often, then your body will naturally secrete more hormones. And even if you're not walking around sweaty and you're obviously getting clean after you exercise, the pheromones are still there, like stuck on your skin, stuck in your hair, etc. And especially for men, exercise increases your testosterone levels, which increase your pheromone output naturally. They also suggest some supplements that you can take for increasing your pheromone levels, but I haven't read anything about that, so I'm definitely not going to suggest or recommend anything because I don't know enough about it to do that. The fact that female pheromones vary with the menstrual cycle kind of reminds me of an animal going into season or going into heat. Like, your body is naturally attracting more mates when you get closer to your menstrual cycle or when you're ovulating. So that's insane. And also, if pheromones are influencing our brains in such a way like this, then how are other smells influencing our brains? Because it's not like there's been so much research done on just random smells. Obviously food smells, there's been a ton of research on that, but other smells in general, I'm really interested about that. I'm going to move on to the next article now, and there's a lot of medical terminology in this, so I'm going to read the key parts, which are very small, and then I'm going to give a brief synopsis of what this is actually saying, because otherwise we're going to be here all day trying to, define medical terminology. So basically this one is from the National Library of Medicine, and I again will link that. And it is saying that the male pheromone is detected primarily in sweat, and female pheromone has been found primarily in urine. Yay. Let me just ask you, at what point is a man going to be smelling your urine? I don't know. If you're into that kind of thing, I guess. Anyways, in a previous positron emission tomography study, we found that smelling the male hormone and the female hormone activated regions covering sexually dimorphic nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, and that this activation was differentiated with respect to sex and compound. In the present study, the pattern of activation induced by the male and female hormone was compared among homosexual men, heterosexual men, and heterosexual women. In contrast to heterosexual men and in congruence with heterosexual women, homosexual men displayed hypothalamic activation in response to the male hormone. Maximal activation was observed in the medical preoptic area anterior hypothalamus, which according to animal studies is highly involved in sexual behavior. As opposed to putative pheromones, common odors were processed similarly in 3 groups of subjects and engaged only the olfactory brain. These findings show that our brain reacts differently to the 2 putative pheromones compared with common odors and suggests a link between sexual orientation and hypothalamic neuronal processes. And this I found extremely interesting, and let me explain why. I'm not going to get into the whole LGBTQ plus community right now, but I am going to get into homosexual people because, there's kind of 2 schools of thought regarding homosexual people. And some people think that they're either been, turned homo by some kind of outside influence or some kind of experience or etc. And then the rest of the people, including most homosexuals, will say that they were born that way. And that's what I personally believe as well. I believe that people were born who they are and how they are. And this is very supportive of that school of thought, because it's saying that your brain is attracted to a specific hormone depending on your sexual orientation. You can't train your brain to be subliminally or subconsciously attracted to a hormone which literally you can't smell. It's odorless. So you can't change your brain chemistry to be attracted to something like that. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me what I have always thought. And what I've always thought is that we are who we are on a chemical level. And that's basically it. I mean, it's not a big surprise or new information. Now I'm going to move right along, and I promise not to fry your brain anymore with any more medical terminology. I actually enjoy it, but I know that most people don't. Some people do, most people don't. So this next article was published by the New York Times in 2005, and using brain imaging technique, Swedish researchers have shown that homosexual and heterosexual men respond differently to 2 odors that may be involved with sexual arousal, and that gay men respond in the same way as women. I don't know how broad the study was. I would assume that not all gay men respond, their brains respond the same way as women. I would say probably most do, but not all. And it doesn't really have any specific information on how broad the study was. And this information is actually pretty old, and I struggled to find articles regarding studies on homosexuals in regards to pheromones, especially in homosexual women. And these articles are so old, I thought that there would have been something published about homosexual women by now, but I was wrong because I haven't found it. And if you do find something, if you look into this more and you find something, please share it with me because I'm really interested to know. And anyways, back to the article. The new research may open the way to studying human pheromones as well as the biological basis of sexual preference. There you have it. It's a biological basis. It's not a choice. Anyways, pheromones, chemicals emitted by one individual to evoke some behavior in another of the same species, are known to govern sexual activity in animals, but experts differ as to what role, if any, they play in making humans sexually attractive. Like I said, this is an old article, so we already know that the pheromones do play a part in making people sexually attractive to another. Because just to reiterate, newer studies have shown that homosexual men, their brain responds the same way to male pheromones as a heterosexual female. So there we go. And this is the one article that I could find regarding lesbians, and it is from New Scientist. And it says, lesbian and heterosexual women respond differently to specific human odors, a brain scanning study has found. The homosexual women showed similar brain activity to heterosexual men when they inhaled certain chemicals, which may be pheromones, the researchers say. So this is, I think, why there has been not so much published regarding lesbians, because apparently it's not so cut and dry as it is with homosexual men. So that's the one thing that I found a bit frustrating when researching this, because I felt like there should have been more research done, or more specific research done, to find what pheromones are causing a chemical reaction in homosexual females. And just for the record, I don't usually use all of this terminology. In fact, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because I think that our sexuality is just our sexuality and that's it. So I wouldn't normally use these put labels on people like this, but for the purposes of this topic, it's necessary, because the brain activity is different in varying types of people, or rather the brain activity depending on your sexual orientation or your sexuality. So briefly back to this article, the positron emission tomography, which is a PET scan for us layman people, because I'm not a doctor either, revealed which regions of the women's brains responded to each chemical. So when the heterosexual women smelled the male hormone, their brain showed activity in the anterior hypothalamus, which we have already discovered is responsible for sexual desire. And when lesbians smelled the male hormones, they only had activity in the olfactory region, which is where you process odors. And also the female hormone, they only showed activity in the olfactory region, which again is where you process odor. So it looks like the study is fairly inconclusive regarding lesbians. Again, there's not full information on how broad the study was, so I mean, we're all individuals, and depending on who you are, you might have reactions to pheromones or you might not, and we don't know how broad the scope was regarding the lesbian study or the gay man study. Also, in that article, it says that they were using an estrogen-like substance for the female pheromone, and we have discovered in later studies that the women produce a pheromone called copulin. So they weren't even using copulin. They were using an estrogen-like substance, which probably wouldn't do much. I mean, it seems the chemicals seem to be pretty specific. And I don't understand why they wouldn't have just used naturally produced pheromones for this study, because it's not like sweat is hard to come by. Just get someone on a treadmill for 10 minutes, you know? So yeah, to wrap this up, I find this extremely fascinating. I find it extremely fascinating how, our brains are influenced and our behaviors are influenced by odorless chemicals that we secrete, and how our bodies are so perfect for attracting a partner. And I think that someone's smell is really important if you're getting into a relationship or something, to at least not be put off by their smell, because that's not going to be something that over a long period of time is going to be working out. And I just think that it's really interesting, and I want to know more about it. And if you'd like to know more about it, then let me know. And again, my socials will be linked all down below, as well as the articles and a picture of my kitty. So if you're interested, check that out. And if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, then please follow me or subscribe, depending on what platform you're listening on. And thanks for hanging out with me today, and I hope that you have a great day. I'll see you next time. Bye.